Well, since I had a bunch of reproducers out, I thought we'd go over a few of the basic Victor style reproducers. The three main ones being Exhibition, right there, the number 2, and the number 4. This is actually an HMV number 4 that I just rebuilt. Not the same one I played in the Silvertone. This one belongs to a 101 that I'm currently working on. One of 3 that I'm currently working on, actually. It's an all brass, but and over here we have one that is going to be for the Silvertone because it fits on there. It's a gold-plated Victrola number 2. We'll get to that in a minute. The Exhibitions, this one is waiting for me to go over it. It's been rebuilt, not by me, so I'm going to go through it and make sure everything is as it should be. Needs a little cleaning up too. Why rebuild your reproducer? It looks like it's fine. There's nothing wrong with it. It fits on the tone arm. Well, for one thing, let's start with the Isolator Gasket, or the back gasket, flange gasket if you want, in the back. This big gasket here. This one is soft and pliable. See how it's nice and soft like that? Okay, that's because it's fairly recent. It's probably been replaced in the last year or 2. And that's how it should be. It should be nice and soft so that the reproducer is allowed a little bit of movement, freedom of movement, on the tone arm. Excuse me. You don't want it to be all stiff on there because then the needle cannot move properly in the groove of the record and it starts to cut. You don't want that. So you replace this. And besides that, these get weak when they get hardened with age. They can actually, this gasket can break apart and your reproducer will fall off the tone arm. And then it gets lost and gone. That happened a lot. Sometimes these little springs here, these tension springs, you see a little tension spring on the screw? There's 2 of them. These can get broken. They break. Not as often as on the number 2. We'll get to that in a minute. But they do break. And then your needle bar will fall off. It won't fall off unless it's broken here in the middle too. But it's not going to work anymore. So you want to check those, make sure they're good, make sure the tension's proper. You want to make sure you have the proper alignment on the needle bar here. That means that when you're looking at the reproducer like this, and there's a needle in here, the needle is perfectly aligned 90 degrees with this reproducer body. Use a straight edge to check that. And if it's not, then you have a long odyssey of gently bending this to get it back into shape so that 2 things that have. One, you have that 90-degree alignment with the housing right here. And at the same time, this little foot, that little foot that's touching the diaphragm, the mica diaphragm, is just barely touching. And it's tough to get that alignment, and you want that foot to sit flat like it is there too. You don't want it angled up or down or anything else. So it could take you quite a while to get that. Sometimes it takes hours. It could really be a pain to get that back. And how do they get bent? When they fall off and boom, hit things on the floor like that, whatever, they can get bent over, 100 years. Dropped on the record 10,000 times, that sort of thing. They frequently are bent. Every now and then I'm shocked to find one that slides right on there and it's perfect. That almost never happens on either the number 2 or the Exhibition. The 4 is a different situation. How they adjust anyway. So you always have to do that. Now the gasket's here. You see that white tube gasket there? That's actually a recent gasket. I can press my fingernail into it. It's soft. All of that. That's how you want it to be. That's how it needs to be because this mica diaphragm here needs to be able to vibrate with the needle bar here. It needs to be able to vibrate. That's what creates the sound. Now, if this gasket is stone hard, this is a natural rubber gasket. If it's stone hard like they all are when they're 100 years old, then not only are you getting small air leaks around it, because it's no longer sealing tightly to the diaphragm, but you've lost the freedom of movement in that diaphragm. It can't move anymore, it can't vibrate like it should, and now you're losing fidelity, a lot of fidelity. You're losing volume. It's not good, not a good situation. It takes experience to get to the point where you're, doing these and they work well and they sound good. It doesn't happen overnight. If you buy your diaphragm and gasket kit from Walt Summers at Gettysburg Antique Phonograph, he's the only one that I know of that sells these kits and also includes an instruction sheet. The instruction sheet doesn't cover everything. Sorry, Walt, it doesn't. It doesn't cover the intricacies of the needle bar. It tells you the basics, you know, how it should sound. When it doesn't really cover the intricacies of what you have to do to straighten a bent and damaged needle bar. That comes from experience. You know, and I could see mistakes have been made on this one. This is loose here. That nut looks like it's a little bit loose on there. The gasket was slightly bulged out. So whoever did this didn't have a lot of experience, and I imagine this needle bar is not properly aligned. But that's okay. That's why I'm going to go through it before I use it to play record. And somebody forgot to put the beeswax sealant right here on that center screw there. There should be beeswax sealant on there. As you see, I don't know, can you see it here? Barely. This one's mostly flaked off on that one. This has to be gone over also. This one, though, I just put that on. You can see the beeswax sealant there in the middle. That's to stop any air leaks happening. Tiny air leaks, they matter. That's to stop them from happening at that little foot there. And seal it up. You can put it on both sides. You can put it on one side. Really, you only need it on the one side. The outside, it's easier. It doesn't really do a whole lot on the inside because you've already sealed the outside, but you can. The factory did. And exhibitions, you know, this is the original Victor reproducer, basically, going back to 1901. There's variations of this. There's the one with the long throat. That's the one with the long tube here. Those are for the early horn machines, not for Victrolas. You know, and then there's a few other. I haven't included every Victor, you know, every type of Victor reproducer here. But these are the basic ones. And when you do these, it's probably a good idea to replace the diaphragm. I don't always. I like to use original diaphragms if they're still good. But there's a risk here. Until you test the reproducer with the new gaskets, you really don't know how that diaphragm is going to sound. It could be scratchy and delaminated and just crap. So, you know, if it's not something you're really experienced at dealing with, and don't mind the fact you may have to take the entire thing apart again to redo everything, then you probably should just go with a new diaphragm. You know, they're like, what are they, $14, something, $11 to $14, something like that, from all the parts suppliers. It's not that expensive. But, you know, this is a risk. When you use a used diaphragm, you don't know what you're going to get until you test it. Most of the time they're good, unless you see they're obviously cracked and delaminating. Sometimes you can visually see this. And if you do, then you would definitely don't want to use that again. And there's a way, you know, they have a certain sound to them when they're out of the, you know, when you're holding it in your hand. It's no longer in the body anymore. They ring a little bit. When you touch them, you hear them like ring, almost like a piece of glass. Some of them actually are glass, but not for these reproducers. You know, it's got a ring to it. You get to know it after a while. And of course, you always want to be careful with this thumb wheel here. This is your thumb wheel. Now, I've seen videos where some people rebuilding these will suggest taking this thumb wheel out. But almost all the time, not every time, but almost all the time, the end of this little threaded shaft here is burred over. That's from years of being clamped onto the needles again and again and again and again. They get burred over, so now they don't want to move out of the, they don't want to unthread. Don't force it. If it doesn't want to, oil it up a little and leave it there. This needle bar, if you can find one, is about $40 to replace. You know, so, and the thumb screw will be another $7 or $8 if you can find. I think Walt has them. I'm not 100% sure of that. So you want to make sure that doesn't happen to you. So if you don't have to take it out, don't. There's no reason to take it out. If it's moving freely and there's no problems with it, dab a little bit of oil on the threads and leave it alone. Don't try to force it out. Enough of that. But that's your exhibition. You know, but that's why it's important to replace these gaskets on all of them. That's any reproducer. Most reproducers, whether they're Victor or not, are going to use some form of rubber gasket. A lot of them use the same tube gasket, like the silver tone, you know, and other ones. Some variation of it, some thinner, some thicker. They all, that's natural rubber. It's just how rubber is. It gets hard with age. It was hard 60 years ago, 70 years ago even, because these machines have been sitting a long time. And it needs to come out of there and be replaced. If you want, hey, look, if you're just looking to display a machine and you don't care, you're never going to play a record on it, so what? Leave your original reproducer on it. It doesn't matter then. But if you're going to play records, and you want it to sound good and impressive, then you need to rebuild or have the reproducer rebuilt. There are people that do this, like Walt Summers, George Valima, and many others, that do this. They have a professional store or whatever. You can send it to them, and they will rebuild your reproducer for you. This price range for rebuilding them used to be around $45-50. Now it's probably closer to 70 or 80, I think, because the cost of materials has gone up, and there's been inflation over the years. That's because I used to have my reproducers rebuilt many years ago. I wasn't satisfied with how it was being done, so I learned to do it myself. That's basically it. And I've done hundreds and hundreds of them since then. So, and now it's I do enough volume of machines in my collection that it's actually worthwhile for me. If I was just owning one Victrola, not really worthwhile to invest in the tools and the time and the effort to learn to rebuild one reproducer. That's the only one I'm gonna do in my lifetime, whatever. Then it's better off I would have just sent it out or whatever. But I had a lot of machines, and I have even more now. So it's good to have this done. And by the way, records are not replaceable. These are. You can find a reproducer, even a rebuilt one. You can find them on eBay, $150, $120, $130 for an exhibition, completely rebuilt. They're there. Records, on the other hand, nobody's making them anymore. When you wear it out and it's done, it's finished. You may be able to go out and get another copy. It's going to cost you a lot of money. On eBay, the average cost of a 7-8 RPM record, it starts at like $5 or $6 and goes up from there. So you don't want to, and some of them you may not be able to find. See, you got an original copy of the Charleston or something like that from the 20s. And it doesn't matter what pressing it is. They're all expensive. Some of those can be $100, $150 each. You don't want to ruin a record like that. All right, the number 2. This is the number 2 Victrola. It's a little dirty because this is not rebuilt yet. This is waiting, for its turn. Again, we have an isolator gasket. It's a different kind on this. It's this one right here. This is the same isolator gasket it shares with the number 4. And like the exhibition, it's natural rubber. And I don't know if you can see, I can't even dent that with my nail. That is rock solid rubber in there. That has to be replaced, which has been done already on this one, which is rebuilt. I rebuilt this actually some time ago. It's one of my spares. But this is a gold-plated one. This is a nickel-plated one. Let's put them next to each other. You'll find this with the exhibition and the number 4 also. Nickel plating was your regular average Victrola. Your smaller tabletop models, all the way up through the Victrola 9. Your portables generally, except for the 260 and the 255, they had a gold plate, but everything else was a nickel plated. Gold plated was something Victor reserved for the upper price range of machines. Your Victrola 16s, your fancier portables like the 255 I mentioned, it was the 260, the 2-60 that had a gold-plated number 4, but that was a pot metal one. The more expensive ones will have the gold plate. It's just plating. There's no difference in the reproducer. They're exactly the same reproducer. This is my spare. This is actually, I'm going to use this on the Silvertone until the day comes when I'm able to get the original Silvertone reproducer apart. It's pot metal. There's a small metal ring involved that has its own screw, and you can't force it. So luckily for me, you can fit a Victor reproducer, an exhibition number 2 or number 4, onto the Silvertone. That's not true for every machine. Anyway, these also have the 2 tension springs on the needle bar. Unlike the exhibition, these tension springs are under a lot more tension, and they do have a high tendency to snap, especially when they're a century old. They are available. You can get new ones. That's not a problem. They're a bit of a challenge to replace, only in that the screws are tiny. They can be tight. You need proper hollow ground screwdrivers to deal with them. Jeweler's screwdrivers. Don't try to do this with, something that does not fit that slot, because you will strip that screw out, and then it's a big deal. You want to coil everything up, coil oil beforehand, and all of that. And like the exhibition, you do have to deal with needle bars that aren't straight. A lot of times. Again, like with any reproducer, of this type, the needle has to be aligned 90 degrees with the body. At the same time, that little foot there that touches the diaphragm has to just barely be touching, just barely. It's a real pain in the neck to get that perfect. And I've been known to spend hours and hours doing that just to get it right. Tiny adjustments, tiny adjustments on bending this needle bar until it's perfect. And it has gaskets. This is actually originally from the factory. This is a one-piece rubber gasket with a slot in the middle that the diaphragm fit into that slot and it dropped in there. The modern replacements are like this. They are a foam type gasket, which works. They do work. They seal well. They fit. Unfortunately, the problem with this foam I found is that it can adjust itself. Once the diaphragm's in there and the body's clamped, the foam finds the level it wants to be at. So this diaphragm can make slight adjustments up or down, and that throws off your needle bar. So what you got to do, what I do, is I clamp these, get it all clamped up with the gasket in there, make sure the needle bar hole is aligning with the diaphragm, the needle bar screw and the hole in the diaphragm aligned. And then I just set that aside for a week, long, whatever. You know, sometimes I don't have a lot of time, so I just set it aside. It could be 2 weeks, who knows? That gives that gasket enough time to adjust. That's just the nature of the material used. I actually think this material is sourced from the shoe industry because it does look and act like the lining of shoes that I've seen. And I know of at least one rebuilder, not in this country, but he clued me in, that he is buying sheets of this stuff from a shoe manufacturer or someone who supplies shoe manufacturers and is cutting gaskets from them because they're the right width, you know, and all of that, and the material does work. It comes in all different colors. These are red because that's what number 2s use, but you don't have to use red. You know, you don't have to be worried about that. If you're worried about getting a functional reproducer, don't worry about the color. You can rebuild these with that same white gasket that you see on the exhibition, the tube gasket. You can. It'll work. I've done it. It will work. But these gaskets are available. They're not one piece. They're two-piece, a top and a bottom, so you do have to be very careful about the alignment of your diaphragm. With the walls of the body here. It cannot touch the body wall. Much easier to do with the number 4 and the number 2 with modern diaphragms than it is with the exhibition. The exhibition is very tight. There's literally the space of a business card, let's say, between the diaphragm, edge of the diaphragm, and the wall of this body of the reproducer. If at any place it's touching, you're going to get a high buzz and lose your fidelity. So it has to be perfect. And I have a trick to doing this. I take one of Walt's cards, because he gives me one with every time I buy stuff from him. I cut little snips out of it, little strips of paper, a little business card. And when I put that diaphragm in, you dab a little bit of clear nail polish in a few spots on the gasket. You put your diaphragm on it, and then I slip the pieces of cut business card all around. Not from this side, obviously. We'll be doing it from this side without the body on there, but all around to space it out properly. I leave it there until the nail polish is dried, and I gently remove them. And now my diaphragm is perfectly spaced from the wall. It's not touching anywhere. I don't have to worry about it. It's perfect. And then I clamp it, and then I screw around with the needle bar. But that's important. Now, I have noticed I did get a hold of a small supply of original, period correct, 1920s, I'm guessing Victor or some other supplier, diaphragms, mica diaphragms, and I've noticed that they are slightly larger than what is available today. And they're just about to the end. You know, they're almost touching. Without using that one-piece gasket, there is the risk they could touch the wall of the reproducers. You got to go over them and to make sure. And on those, when I use one of those diaphragms, I make sure I do the trick with the playing, not playing card. No, that might work too. The little snips of business card, and I put them all around. Little strips. That's all. Little strips of paper. And see, we covered the gaskets, the back gasket, the springs, the difficulties with needle bars. It's pretty much what you have to do with these. This, the number 4, it's a lot easier with the needle bar. This one uses a pivot. And there's no tension springs on these. There's a ball bearing and the little rods in there that connect to right up to the needle bar. I don't know if you can really see that. maybe from this side. See the adjusting nuts and what looks like a little stud coming out of it that's actually a shaft that runs in here. There's a lock screw. And it attaches to the needle bar with a ball bearing that's in there. And the needle bar will vibrate back and forth. Trick with these is, when you adjust these, it has to just be touching enough so that there's no side-to-side movement, but it's not binding the needle bar. This should be tight enough so that when you have no diaphragm on there and no shell on there, and you do this, the needle bar will swing away. But it's just tight enough so that it won't, there's no movement side to side. That's important. Sometimes you have to adjust these more than once to get it right. You'll get various distortions and buzzes or whatever. Same gasket. This one's been replaced, so it's nice and pliable. The isolator gasket in the back. The thing about these HMVs, the one difference they have from the Victor, other than a minor styling difference here on the ring, and of course the lettering, the stud, you see the stud there that lets you align it to the tone arm right there? You notice there's a screw here. On HMV, that screw actually goes all the way through and is the stud. But in this country, in the U.S., when you get these replacement gaskets, they already have the stud mounted there. So what you have to do, and these are available new also, is get a new screw and replace that original stud with that screw and just use it as a set screw the same way Victor did. That's how Victor did it. Very easy to do, not a big deal when you have access to the parts, which we do here. And that allows me to use these new, nice, soft. These, by the way, are from Walt Summers. He has them made, I understand, in-house. I believe I read that in one of his advertisements. It's a very soft material, like was originally used. Not hard at all. It's properly made. They're not cheap. You're going to pay, well, the more you buy, the cheaper it is, but probably between $14 to $18 for one of those these days. The price is always going up. They never seem to go down. But now, with the needle bars on these, what makes them easier is that you can attach it to the diaphragm, screw it in place, whatever. Then you do your check, make sure it's 90 degrees, aligned with the body. And if it isn't, you just bend this a little, very gently, properly with play. You just bend it slightly, a little bit of time, until your straight edge shows that needle. I just put a nice steel ruler flat against one side or the other, and I can see if the needle is straight with it. That's really all it is to it with these. These are a lot easier with the needle bar aspect of it. Diaphragms are available. Again, this originally used a one-piece rubber gasket with a slot in the middle, just like the number 2s did, with a slot in the middle, the diaphragm slipped into, and it went right in. Made at the factory, probably putting these together a lot easier, because you didn't have to align the needle bar. It was always perfectly aligned. You just slid the whole diaphragm right in, clamped it shut, and then you went on to your needle bar work. There was no worrying about if the hole lines up with the needle bar and everything's perfect. It's not touching the body of the reproducer. There's none of that. Now, take a look at that gasket. Let's see if I can zoom in on it. That is an original HMV one-piece rubber gasket. And usually, when you get these and you take them apart, that gasket is so stone petrified, it shatters. When you go to take it off, it shatters in a million little pieces, red dust all over to your workstation, all of that. When I took this one apart, that gasket is like brand new. I was amazed. Full, and I know this reproducer was sitting for probably 50 years at least. It's from a machine, came out of an attic, typical. That gasket is fully pliable, soft, supple, didn't stretch out of shape when I took it off, the old diaphragm. I could not believe it. I actually reused it. It's the first time I've ever gotten to do that. And it gave me a good look at what one of these looks like. But you can see how it looks like a sandwich in there. It is. It's got just holding around the outer circumference of the diaphragm, and it allowed me to just drop it right in there perfect. Amazing. I was absolutely amazed at that. I'd really never seen that happen before with anything. unless it had been fresh rebuilt. And look how clean it is. I was totally amazed. I wish I knew the secret of exactly how that was able to be preserved so well. And the machine's a filthy mess. I mean, that's typical. Years of attic dust and mice and everything else. It's got to be cleaned up, but that gasket was perfect. The diaphragm, unfortunately, had a crack. Right, they tend to get a little damage in the middle sometimes. It happens. So I put a brand new one in there. That's one of Walt's diaphragms. It's brand new. And that was the story on that one. Again, with the same thing with the number 2 and number 4 with those thumb screws. If they don't want to come out, never force one. Never force one, because you could snap that. And unless you have tiny little jeweler's drills and all of that stuff to get that out, and a jig to hold it, and all that, a watchmaker could do it, sure, but nobody else really has those kinds of tools handy. So now you're replacing the needle bar. You might as well just replace the entire reproducer, because sometimes that's the only way you can get a needle bar for these things. They're not always available off the reproducer for any of these. Recently I've seen some that were, and I bought a bunch of exhibition ones because I needed some. But normally, if you want another needle bar, you're buying a whole reproducer. And the average cost of a reproducer, say like this, in this condition, off of eBay, the prices have been going up. I'm not really sure why, because I don't think they're particularly rare, but they've been going up. It used to be around $45, $50 would buy. You might get lucky and get one cheaper, but that's pretty rare. If you look at the sold listings, they're going $45, $50, up to $75. And then you still have to rebuild it. Either you're paying someone else to do it, or you're doing it yourself, plus the supplies, diaphragm, gaskets, springs, and back gasket. You're looking at 20, 40, let's just say about $55 to $60 worth of parts if you need everything. By the time you're done. Somewhere in there. I don't have the listing in front of me, but I would guess that that's a good rule of thumb to go by, assuming you might need a screw, you might need a set screw. Who knows what you might need to source in there. So you don't want to screw up what you have if you have one that's in decent shape. You don't want to do anything that would cause undue damage to it and have to go to eBay and buy one of these and maybe have the same problem happen again if you're not careful. So you want to be careful with that. And as you can see, these are the triangular openings. Well, all number 2s are, all number 4s are. That triangular opening is for your fiber needles. It's not for the round ones. They fit, obviously. That is so you can use your fiber needles. And this one also had these exhibitions. The original exhibitions did not have that. They were round. The hole in the middle was round. That's the original ones, because they hadn't invented fiber needles yet. I think it came along in the late aughts or the early teens, I forget when. And Victor was heavily pushing fiber needles. They came from Japan, and they were the newest thing. They would not harm your records. You won't wear out a record with a bamboo needle. You won't. And they can be reused. If you had a needle cutter to resharpen the point on them, you can reuse one, maybe 6, 7, 8 times per cut. And each cut, maybe, I don't know how many cuts you get out of a needle. Depends on how good you are with the nipper. Only taking off a tiny slice of material each time. You can get 25, 30 plays. You never know. It's up to the individual. I mean, you can sharpen it 25, 30 times. Maybe I haven't really tried too many of them to know that, but it probably can. Anyway, if you took this to if you had a round hole in there and you wanted to use fiber needles, you took this to your Victor dealer, they would upgrade it for you. They'd put a new bar on there, new needle bar, with a triangular hole. So now they could sell you fiber needles. So there was an incentive there. Obviously, if you didn't have a reproducer that could fit them, they couldn't sell them to you. So they wanted to be able to sell them to you. So they would upgrade your reproducer. Probably change the gaskets and all that at the same time. But that's the 3 main types of reproducers you will encounter in Victrolas from the mid-aughts all the way up to the end of the era in 1929, when RCA took over the company and phased out production.